taught how to produce a model. So we were sent on like a one-day Excel course, and then we were expected to know how to do the analytical work that was required. And people tried to be helpful. They're saying, oh, I think so-and-so built something last week. Why don't you go and ask him? And so-and-so would be helpful and would email you what he built last week and you'd look at it. And I think often in modelling there's an issue in that, first of all, we have a belief that someone else's model is the starting point. Yeah, that a template or someone else's model should be the starting point for our analysis. A lot of the time people are scared or time pressured and they don't want to start from a blank sheet in Excel. And a lot of models you might have seen, a lot of models I've seen, you go, look, do you know what, if we were starting with a blank sheet in Excel, it wouldn't look like this. So, I mean, a really key skill, I do a lot of what I do now is I do a lot of training and education related work, teaching people really actual foundational skills about how to actually do something starting from a blank sheet in Excel. Because some problems I see if you have the approach I've just mentioned is, if you know Excel, as we all do, I mean, Excel's great, it's an amazing tool. Okay? If you know Excel, often you will play the game I call hunt the formula. Okay? Instead of just coding it yourself. Okay? You could, so what I do at Macquarie University, a lot of it is related to, for example, financial maths, your time value of money. And yes, Excel has some amazing formulas that will do all that work for you. But you can also just code the formula. And some people are like, I can do that? I'm like, yeah. You know, and actually, to some extent, that might actually be preferable. Because if you can read a basic formula in Excel, you can understand the logic if it's just using normal operations like plus, minus, multiply, divide, and raise to the power of. And I get a lot of other people saying, well, I'm not very good at maths. I'm like, okay, here's what you need to know. Plus, minus, multiply, divide, and raise to the power of. Okay? So I find people say they hunt the formula. They think that Excel's inbuilt functions can solve all their problems for them. Okay? Or they think that the internet or a friend can solve their problems for them. They hunt the net and try and find some kind of template. And also, another problem I see is there's a desire to be productive and to just fill the space. You've got to go, oh, I'm doing a model. Yeah, look, I'm doing a model. Yep, it's going well. Modelling. Inside, there's this panic because you're like, I don't actually know what I'm doing. Yeah, I'm cutting and I'm pasting and I'm copying, and I hope, that the right answer will fall out. But some issues that come up was, well, what if your problem doesn't fit the template? And what about all the baggage? I'll put this back. What about all the baggage that comes when you pick up someone else's model? I do a lot of work with investment banks, particularly with people who are in the investment banking department, people who are in the equity research department. And a lot of people in the equity research department have inherited models that have probably been around for 25 years. Okay? And you can tell, okay? And they are so scared to delete. You've got to be brave to delete something, haven't you? Okay, so you don't delete it. You just kind of hide it, maybe. Or you kind of drag the tab to the end, forget about it. So a lot of models have all this baggage that they're dragging with them. And it just chews up memory and it slows down the task. So what I suggest often is, to be good at modeling, it's not all about Excel. Okay? You have to understand the problem you're trying to solve. And often if I'm building a model, I'll actually get out a blank sheet of A4, or sometimes I'll actually get out several sheets of A4 and I'll line them up as if they were the tabs in my model. And I'll just move them around till I get the logic and the sequence right. I'm going to talk a bit more about the logic and the sequence. Because I think the logic in a model needs to go top to bottom and left to right. Okay, a little bit like computer programming. Okay, top to bottom and left to right. And then I just start to almost visualize what's going to go on each tab. Okay. So, I mean, I've got a few slides. These are some of the slides I use when I teach financial modelling to the graduates at the investment banks I work for. And one of the first things I say to people is, okay, look, a financial model is not perfection. You'll drive yourself crazy, okay, if you try and make it perfect. And knowing what is an acceptable simplification is a critical skill of the financial modeler. A model is a tool. It simplifies a real-world problem into an environment that we can control. And it's a tool for analysis and forecasting. So I think a big part of modelling that's forgotten, and I'll come back to it, is what's the whole point? So a lot of times the books will say, look, you've got to have your inputs and your calcs and your outputs. I'm like, yeah, but what are you going to do with those outputs? Okay. Presumably there's a decision that needs to be made. What are you going to do with those outputs? What's the decision that needs to be made? What's the problem that needs to be solved? And if you think a little bit about that, before you start modelling, you probably find that a lot of the logic and the sequencing actually just falls out. And you're much better off starting with a blank sheet of Excel and doing that work and getting something that's fit for purpose. I know there are a lot of people these days are talking about FAST, F-A-S-T. Have you heard of FAST?
We've actually got a session coming up on that later this year.
Okay, so I think it's flexibility, appropriateness. Is that it? Flexibility, appropriateness, standardization, and transparency. Sorry, flexibility, structure. Sorry, flexibility, appropriateness, structure, and transparency. Okay. I have my own version. I call it FIT. How I summarise the best practices are FIT. F for flexibility, absolutely. Okay, it's not a model if it's a one-time solution. Don't use Excel like a calculator. Where every time something changes, you've got to be punching buttons, and just recalculating the whole time. We don't want to use Excel like a calculator. It's not a model unless it can flex, okay? Unless things can change and we can see the new output and how that new output impacts on the decision or the problem we're trying to solve. Integrity, I guess that's where the appropriateness and structure would come in. Yeah, a model, the structural integrity of a model is important. The structural integrity of a model includes its architecture, includes its overall logic and flow, but also includes things like the functional integrity. So an input needs to be coded correctly according to its purpose. For example, if I've got an input for the tax rate in a model, I shouldn't be using that input to produce the revenue growth, for example. And lastly, transparency, where a lot of models fall over. Okay, this is a real formula from a real model, from a real investment bank, that was sent to a real model auditor. Do we have any model auditors or former model auditors in the room? Okay, fantastic. This is a real formula from a real model, from a real investment bank that was sent to a real model auditor. Okay, how long do you think, and this is one formula, how long do you guys think it would have taken you to audit this one formula? I know I'm putting you on the spot, but just have a 10 minutes? Oh, God. And would you have green lighted it, orange lighted it, or red lighted it? Now 10 minutes for Les is probably not, there's 10 minutes of Les time. So next is it Paul? Ian, sorry, Ian. What do you think, Ian?
I imagine it'll take a good 20 minutes or so to understand exactly what it's doing.
Yeah, 20 minutes to understand exactly what it's doing.
It depends on what those ingredients are. If those ingredients are funny, it might take 3 days.
Yeah. Well, shall I tell you what the real model auditor billed for. They billed for an hour of time on this one formula. Now, did they green light it, orange light it, or red light it? I don't know if any of you are familiar with the traffic light system in model audits, but model auditors will red light something that is definitely a fail. Orange light something that they're going to let it go, but they think it could have been done better, or they green light it. You guys say, did you know, Kazay? Would you have red lighted it, orange lighted it, or green lighted it?
So we said red and orange.
No context.
Absolutely. It was red lighted and orange lighted. Okay. So that's 1 hour of a model auditor's time for one formula, okay, just to be given a fail. The model audit cost for the entire model was over $100,000. And by the time the revisions were done and the revisions were taken on board, and by the time the model actually got to be fully passed, it was more like $120,000, $130,000. Now, it's actually the client, not the investment bank, that pays the model audit fee. It's not the investment bank that pays. These days, I hear some model auditors are trying to charge by the formula, not by the hour. I'm not sure how that works.
They quote based on number of unique formulae and complexity of the model. So you quote, they run software over the top of the model, which basically analyzes the complexity and the length of formulas and the number of unique formulas in a model.
What
And
software does that?
spreadsheet detector.
This one.
There's many, but
Okay.
So needless to say, clients,
Did the
what I
formula
found.
end up any better?
Okay. Let's go. Why was it red lighted? Can anyone other than Les and Ian see why might this formula have been red lighted? At the back. What's your name?
Jason.
Jason says, yep. Can you see?
There's some hard-coded numbers there that should
Yeah.
be.
Some?
Assumption.
Yeah. Some. How many? How many hard-coded numbers?
0.05, 2000 minus 2 years.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, there's, at the start, there's a little thing which basically is saying assume tiny differences are just rounding and they don't matter. Okay. It says if it's less than 0.05, force it to 0. Okay, so it's by saying tiny balances don't matter, just assume they should be 0 and force them to 0. But then it's going on, and if something else, and if something else. Oh, what? How many ifs are in here?
deep nested if.
We're in deep nested if territory. Okay.
Just a tangential question. Are
Yes.
these sort of like readily available tools to sort of like
Yes.
expand
Yeah.
them into proper sort of indented if statements?
Oh, well, what you can do is you can put soft returns if you want, and a part of, I mean, everyone will have their own way of getting their head around it. But you know, it's not gonna be fun, is it?
Yeah.
It's not gonna be fun. It's not gonna be pretty. And yeah, the reason it was red lighted is it's basically this was fatal at the end. Okay. There's a 2000 there and a 2000 there. Does anyone want to take a stab at saying what was this formula even for in the first? What was its purpose in the first place?
To me, something to do with cash and paying the debt, which is
Yeah,
pretty
absolutely.
fundamental.
It's something. Yep.
Sadly.
This was from a structured financing. It was a syndicated loan on an infrastructure project. So it's a structured financing, syndicated loan. Syndicate of banks that got together. One of the banks was tasked with producing the model.
Is 2000 a year?
No, 2000 is absolutely right. It's a minimum cash balance. It should be an input. In fact, it was an input, but do you know what the input said the minimum cash balance was? 1,000.
Oh no.
And this is why we never hard code anything in a model other than, I would say, 0 and 1. The binary numbers can be inside formulas, but hopefully as decision-making tools, not as assumptions, but as a way we make a decision on something.
What's your opinion about divided by 12?
No.
I always say that's
Okay. Well, there's something. What I know people do it. And I see people in my training courses where I give them a model and I have inputs, and I actually say to them, when you divide by 12, please go to the inputs and find the section called constants. And please
Name
find
it.
the number 12 in there and divide by
But don't you
that.
think that's fairly constant?
Look, that is best practice to the nth degree of best practice. But then, you know, we can get into a debate about, you know, are there 365 days in a year?
True. Very true.
Or is there 366 days every fourth year? Or is there 365.25 days in a year? Now, most of those things are not going to have a material difference on the outputs of your model. So I kind of come back to, it's not perfection. It's a simplification of the real world into an environment that you can control. Okay. This was basically, this was actually producing what's often called a revolver. This was producing a short-term liability, an overdraft, we might call it in Australia. So as you might be familiar, often when we build a balance sheet, we've got two unknowns. We've got cash and overdraft are the unknowns.
Working capital.
This was the formula for the overdraft. If it was going to be a negative cash plug, this was the formula to produce it. Now, to some extent, look, this looks a lot worse than it actually is. Why does it look a lot worse than it actually is? And what's the lesson we can take away from that?
Maybe the parts in it. The repeated parts in it.
The repeated parts in it, yep.
Tab name.
The tab names, yes. The tab names are in full and they're very, very long. Okay, so if the tab names had been shorter, for example, if the debt schedule had just been called debt, if the cash flow statement had just been called CFS, it wouldn't look quite as bad as it does. The problem with this is that when you're actually in Excel, okay, if you actually have this formula in Excel, my preference is when I edit formulas, I've set my options so that I always am here in the formula bar when I edit formulas, not in the spreadsheet. Is everyone aware of what I'm talking about there? Yeah, because the problem often with when you've got a formula like that in the spreadsheet, it obliterates everything else and you can't see. But even a formula as big as the one we just had there, okay, if I had it in the formula bar, it would still be obliterated. So, have you heard of the rule of thumb? Okay. The rule of thumb is, at least, have you heard of the 80-20 rule?
Yep.
Yeah, I would say, combine the two together. 80% of the time, don't write a formula that is longer than your thumb. Okay? Because it's not going to be transparent. Okay? To me, this, if I see this in a model, I go, oh, no, please, no. Because I know that this has been around for years and years and years. It's been cut and paste from one model into another model because no one would start from scratch and build a model like that, build a formula like that. I hope they wouldn't. Anyway. Does anyone in this room think that they would be proud of that formula? I wouldn't, okay? I'd be horrified if I could not simplify it. Okay? So the rule of thumb helps you with everything, okay? It helps your model have integrity, it helps the formulas to be free of errors, and it helps you, if you do make a mistake, to spot it. The rule of thumb is don't build a formula longer than your thumb. Try and break it down into calcs. Yeah? Step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, and then put it all together at the end. So which brings me on to a point, there is and this is probably one of the big takeaways, and I know a lot of people, like I said before, they say, look, it's a principle, separate your inputs from your counts from your outputs. But I would say, try and actually put them in that order in the first place, because that's logical. I see a lot of models where there are some inputs here, and then there are some outputs, and then there are some workings. Okay, and I'm like, well, I'm going up and down and left and right and left and bottom and up, and I'm like, I'm dizzy. Okay, I'm dizzy. I feel like I'm drowning. Yeah, and I need to blow bubbles. Is anyone a diver? Okay. Yeah, how do you get out of trouble in the water when you don't know which way's up?
Blow bubbles.
You blow bubbles. Okay. Well, you blow bubbles. Okay, and I feel like I wish I could just blow bubbles. Okay. Now the closest I know to blowing bubbles and getting out of trouble is just to kind of go control home. Okay, when I feel like overwhelmed and drowning, I go control home. But I really wish a lot of people would build their models a lot more top to bottom, left to right, following this really logical structure. There are inputs, okay? Then there'll be some workings, then there'll be some outputs, but then there'll be the fun stuff, which is what you actually do with those outputs. What's the decision? What are the options? What's the recommendation? And I think a lot of the time, that's actually not given enough space in a model. A lot of time is spent on the inputs and the workings and the outputs, and not enough time is spent on the what does this mean. But yeah, top to bottom, left to right. That's my big message. Top to bottom and left to right. It's extremely logical, and it really, really helps. Now, let's just talk about some other things that help. Okay, so can I ask who in the room owns a car? Own a car. Okay, so is it Cindy? Cindy, what kind of car do you have?
Toyota Yaris.
Aha. Okay. Does anyone else in the room have a Toyota Yaris? No? Who else? Okay. Did you have a car?
Yeah.
So now is it David? David, what kind of car do you have?
Renault Clio RS.
Ah.
LT.
Is the RS important?
No, no.
Is that what you said?
Isn't that racing and
Just a bit more powerful, but yeah.
You said it. It was on the tips of your tongue.
For a guy it is.
Okay, now let's
racing
say.
sport?
So okay, let's say degree of difficulty. Okay, where 1 is really easy and 10 is like almost impossible. David, if you were to get into Cindy's Toyota Yaris, how easy or difficult do you think it would be for you to drive it?
1.
1. Okay, awesome. And Cindy, if you were to get into David's Renault Clio, degree of difficulty, 1 being super easy, 10 being almost impossible, how easy do you think it would be to drive?
10 really. Don't want to cause any damage.
No, but I mean, how easy do you think it would be for you to actually, like, start the ignition and put it in gear and make it go?
I'd say something in the middle.
Okay.
Depends if she drives.
Yeah. Okay.
You can't drive a manual.
Okay. Well,
It's an auto.
Okay,
It's
so it's
an
an
auto.
auto. Okay. Now, what makes it easy to drive someone else's car?
It's not as middle.
Well, it's not as easy as driving your car.
All the bits are in the right place.
All the bits are in the right place. Well, what are these bits?
Standardisation.
What is standardisation? Yes, standardisation. But does standardisation mean identical?
No.
No. Okay. So you're right. Look, some cars are automatic, some cars are manual. Provided you've been trained and you know how to do both, you can drive that car. Driving on the left-hand side of the road is different from driving on the right-hand side of the road. Okay. And yes, depending on what you're used to. Okay. But there are certain things that if you know how to drive a car, okay, you know how to drive a car. Yeah. So I'd agree with you. Most cars, yeah, you get into them. Yep, you kind of figure out. There are certain universal and easily recognisable things, aren't there? Like steering wheel,
Mirrors.
brakes, accelerator. Okay. Now, wouldn't it be amazing if we could have the same for a financial model?
Yes.
Yes, it would. Okay, well, let's think about it. The starting point, I think, at a minimum for this in a financial model has to be to go back to something like a cover sheet, inputs, workings, outputs. So what? So what does that mean? What's the analysis? What's the takeaway? Okay. And what I found is, and I'm going to show you a couple of examples of some really truly bad models. Part of the reason they're so truly awful is it's impossible, without a bit of effort, to see, what the steering wheel is and where it is, what the brake is and where it is, what the accelerator is. So, for example, what are the inputs? Where are they? What are the outputs? What are the takeaways? And one of the first things I say to people, they go, look, Jennifer, look, you know, I've got this awful model. I inherited it from the previous person who did my job, and I'm really scared of it, yeah. But I really want to do something. What can I do? So look, the first thing you can do is just start putting in subheadings at least, yeah? Or start using some colours or using something that lets you go, this row is an input, yeah? This row is a calc, this row is an output, this row is a what does that mean for a stakeholder. And sometimes I find you can actually make a model that seems like, you know, it's got no redeeming features, actually, yeah, much more lovable and workable just by doing this grouping, you know, grouping and labeling. Yeah, it's like those obvious features: steering wheel, brake, accelerator.